All right. Hey, everybody. Well, it's close enough to 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started because I got a couple things to go through, and I don't want to cut into Valerie's time here. So thank you for you here in the room and to you at home for joining us for tonight's program, talking about where our wedding traditions come from. It's going to be a fascinating program here with Valerie. Let me remind you of the things I remind you of every single time we're together. First, we'll start with the people at home. We have closed captioning enabled. You can see it down at the bottom where your Zoom tools are. Look for the closed captioning symbol, click on it, and you can change the font size. You can turn it on and off, wherever you like. For those of us in the room here today, let's remind you of the same things every time we get together. To your right, my left, are the bathrooms. Women's bathroom is immediately out to your left. The men's bathroom is down the hallway a little bit. Between those two doors is our water fountain and our emergency exit, should we need it at any time. All right? And if I could remind you to please silence your cell phones. If you have the luxury of being able to turn them off, great. If you could silence them, we really appreciate it. Let me talk about a few things that are coming up here. Library. Number one, tomorrow, Thursday, February 2nd at 1:30 p.m., we're inviting Steve Darnall. We've had Steve in the past doing things about movies and radio. As part of our One Book, One Community, he is going to do Old Time Radio and the Great American Songbook. For those of you who have read the book, This Tender Land by William Kent Kruger, the book is set in the 1930s. And so we booked Steve thinking you'd probably want to hear what they were listening to on the radio at that time. Also, some of you might remember what they were playing on the radio at that time. So come and listen to Steve. Here's some great old-time radio favorites. He's always a great time. And that's 1:30 here in this room, part of our One Book, One Community. Secondly, on Tuesday, February 7th, we are inviting jazz duo Petra Van Noyce and Andy Brown. That's going to be Tuesday, February 7th at 7 p.m. here in the Rasmussen Room. We booked this as a Valentine's concert. If you have not seen Andy and Petra before, I promise you, it is one of the best jazz performances you're going to see live. Andy is a regular guitar player and instrumentalist at the Green Mill in Chicago, which is a very famous jazz club. Petra, I have seen personally multiple times. She's always great. She just nails those jazz standards like nobody else. So again, that's Tuesday, February 7th at 7 p.m. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is February 16th, the author for our One Book, One Community, William Crank Kruger, will be at the Al Larson Prairie Center for the Arts. And if you want to sign up for these or any of our programs, go to our website, schaumburglibrary.org, or you can call, email our friendly people at the information desk, and they can get you set up with whatever you like. And as always, you can contact me, email me, anytime with any questions, comments, concerns that you have, because I'm here for you. That's why I'm here. So that is it for those. I am now going to stop talking. I'm going to hand it over to Valerie to talk about Victorian wedding traditions.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here today at Schomburg Library. I live in Bartlett, so it's not a very far drive, which is very nice because sometimes I have to travel further. And today we're going to be talking about wedding traditions of the Victorian era. So this should be fun. Just really quickly, I'll tell you just a couple of things about myself. I've been a historian, a public speaker, and a first-person presenter for over 25 years. I do first-person interpretations of Mary Lincoln, and I do speeches on all things Victorian, the Lincolns, the presidents, and also, which doesn't seem to match, Walt Disney World. But it is my other obsession is Walt Disney World. That's my contact information if you're interested, or I can give you my contact information afterwards if you are interested. But that's enough about me. We're here to talk about the Victorian and the Victorian era. Before we really talk about the Victorians, we have to know what the Victorian era is exactly. Well, it's the period of Queen Victoria's reign. That is lovely Queen Victoria early in her reign. Her reign went from June 7 until her death on the 22nd of January 1901. And for England, this period was a period of peace, prosperity, and refined sensibilities. The industrialization of that era brought middle class, and that had a significant effect on cultural norms, lifestyles, and values. The rise of the middle class during the era had a large effect on the times. One historian said that the Victorian frame of mind is largely composed of middle class characteristic modes of thought and feeling. The family was the center of life for Victorians. The home became a refuge from the harsh world. The number of children shrank around this time, especially with people that lived in cities, allowing much more attention to be paid to each individual child. The middle class ideal was that separate spheres. Women generally avoided public spaces. They avoided politics, paid work, public speaking, so the Victorians would not like me very much. They were expected to be focused on the care of their husbands and children. Legally, women had few rights at this time, even over their own bodies, their family property, and even their children. At this time, the idea that marriage should be based on romantic love and companionship rather than convenience or money began to grow in popularity. Before this, whether or not the couple was in love or even liked one another really wasn't a consideration. If these feelings had to exist, well, that was wonderful. It was considered a fortunate byproduct. In the 19th century, men could find jobs that paid regular wages and didn't have to consider the possibility of a dowry from the girl's parents in what their future money situation would be. And so he could freely choose a mate from any class or from parents that were more wealthy or so that's when love began to be seen as part of choosing a life partner. So what about Victorian courtship and proposals? Asking a young woman for her hand in marriage was never perceived as an easy task. It wasn't then, and it is now. Etiquette manuals of the day warned women not to trifle with a young man's affections, lest it earn the woman the dreaded reputation of being a flirt. Oh no. If a gentleman's behavior towards a woman conveyed romantic feelings and she did not wish to encourage him, she was to do her utmost to gently rebuff him in a kind manner and gradually withdraw from his company. An honorable woman never shared, except with her parents, that she had rejected a suitor. So you didn't gossip with your girlfriends that Bob had proposed and you didn't want to marry him. That was a big no-no. A manual etiquette from 1868 said, if you possess either a decent generosity or at least good breeding, you will not divulge a secret which should be sacred between you. After courtship had gone on for an appropriate period, a woman who found the attention from her suitor indicated in unspoken ways that a proposal of marriage would be welcome. She, of course, could not propose to a gentleman. No, you did not do that. The young lady's father would have already found out about the suitor's finances, meaning were his prospects good enough to have a home and children, to support a wife and children. He would have scrutinized his lineage. Did he come from a reputable family? And he would have deemed him acceptable. At this point, it was safe for the young man to propose, and as stated in a popular etiquette manual, as a general rule, a gentleman need never be refused. Every woman, except for a heartless coquette, finds the means of discouraging a man who she does not intend to have before the matter comes to a point of declaration. Once the suitor deemed that his offer of marriage would be welcomed, there was nothing left to do but pop the question. The phrase "pop the question" came into use in the 1700s, and it meant to ask an important question, which may have been a proposal of marriage, but maybe not. Could have been any important question. By the 1820s, the expression "pop the question" came to be an idiom that solely meant that someone asked you to marry them. Also in the 1800s, men in Europe and in the US began kneeling when they proposed. Now this gesture in the Middle Ages, that is, a knight typically knelt before the woman he was wooing to protect and serve. Should a gentleman find elusive the right words with which to propose, he needed only to consult with popular etiquette manuals. They offered many suggestions. Here are just a few from The Art of Good Behavior. Have you any objection to change your name? How would mine suit you? One word from you would make me the happiest man in the universe. Well, Mary, when is the happy day? What day, I pray you? Why, everybody knows we're going to get married, and it might as well be one time or another, so when shall it be? And for those that were more timid and were tongue-tied and couldn't bear the thought of proposing in person, etiquette manuals like the American Fashionable Letter Writer from 1845 offered sample proposal letters, such as, "Every one of these qualities in which you claim my admiration increased my diffidence by showing the great risk I run in venturing, perhaps before my affectionate assiduities have made the desired impression upon your mind, to take the declaration of ardent passion I have long since felt for you." What? Yeah, certainly wrote differently. So when a gentleman made an offer of marriage, it was incumbent upon the lady to receive it graciously. She knew by instruction from her parents or by advice provided by etiquette manuals never to accept or reject the offer immediately. Such an important decision merited deep thought and discussion with her parents, whose consent was necessary before any answer was given. And that was advice from the young lady's friend in 1837. They also said, "It should be a vowed principle of your life that you will never marry without the consent of your parents." If the young lady's parents opposed the match, the couple carefully considered the objection and perhaps delayed their marriage until the reason for the disapproval had been overcome. The American Fashionable Letter Writer provided an example of a young lady's written reply to a proposal of marriage. There are many points besides mere personal regard to be considered. These I must refer to the superior knowledge of my father and brother. I wouldn't want my brother deciding. And the result of their inquiries is such as my presentiments suggest. I have no doubt my happiness will be attended to by a permission to decide for myself. And I do want to mention here, incidentally, Abraham Lincoln and his wife Mary Lincoln were getting married in this time period in 1840, and they actually broke off their engagement, because Mary's family disapproved of their marriage. And so they actually broke off their engagement for about a year and a half, and then started seeing each other again and decided to go against her family and get married whether they liked it or not. So just a little bit of trivia there about that. But anyway, after proposing, the next daunting step for the gentleman was a formal meeting with the woman's father to officially ask for his consent. It's noteworthy with regard to parental consent that the opinion of the young woman's parents appears to be the only one that matters. No one consulted the suitor's parents, the gentleman's parents. They were basically just told that he was marrying this woman. As someone concluded in Hands and Hearts, A History of Courtship in America, a woman's parents were asked, a man's told. The engagement period typically lasted from 6 months to 2 years, and the age of the couple. And it was a transition between courtship and married life, when couples could come to a full understanding of the meaning behind their commitment. It was viewed as an opportunity to imagine themselves married and to declare their suitability to the world. In the mid-19th century, once a young lady and her parents consented to the marriage, the announcement of the engagement was initially made to family and intimate friends only. This was typically done in writing, and this allowed all involved to take a collective breath and live with the idea for a few weeks. It would be during this time that either party could gracefully break the engagement without doing widespread damage, as it hadn't been told to the wide world. After a week or two, the wider circle of friends and acquaintances would receive the news. Once the engagement was underway, the gentleman was expected to pay frequent calls at his bride's-to-be home. He was to ascertain, however, the most convenient time for his call, and when he visited, he was to focus attention on the entire family, not just on his fiancée. His aim in making the calls was to gradually win the affection of the entire family, especially the girl's mother. The visits were usually made in the evening, with the gentleman wearing evening attire, as he would for the theater or for a concert, so he would be dressed extremely formally. As the etiquette of courtship stated, the negligent of this point would betray, first, a carelessness in habits, next, a want of deference to the lady's family, and lastly, a deficiency in due respect to herself. Despite the protocol set forth in popular etiquette manuals, evidence in diaries of this period indicates that betrothed couples were frequently left alone in the young lady's home until 1 or 2 a.m. Now, Queen Victoria and Albert were into After Victoria acceded to the throne in 1837, tradition dictated that no one could propose to a reigning monarch because that was the way it was. Therefore, Victoria had to propose to Albert. And she proposed during his second visit in October 1839 at Windsor Castle in Berkshire. She wrote in her diary, "At about 12:30, I sent for Albert. He came to the closet where I was alone, and after a few minutes I said to him that I thought he must be aware why I wished them to come, and that it would make me too happy if he would consent to what I wished, to marry me. We embraced each other over and over, and he was so kind and so affectionate. I really felt it was the happiest, brightest moment in my life." All right, so I have a few trivia questions sprinkled throughout just to break it up a little bit. So the first trivia question I have for you is, what month is the most popular for marriage proposals? February. People say February, I hear. Does anybody else have any other guesses? May, somebody says. Those are good guesses. Popular months. Yep.
December.
Somebody says December. The answer is December is the most popular month for proposals. In the US, nearly 40% of engagements happen in the months between Thanksgiving and Valentine's Day. So February is a good guess too. That's according to a survey of 18,000 people. December in particular is the peak month for getting engaged, with Christmas Eve as a particularly popular date. My brother actually got engaged on Christmas Eve years ago. So there you go. All right, let's talk about engagement rings. Speaking of proposals, engagement rings can be traced all the way back to ancient Rome, and these are a couple of examples. According to the Gemological Institute of America, Roman women wore rings of ivory, flint, bone, copper, and iron to signify a business contract or to affirm mutual love and obedience. Gold rings and other jewelry were later found in the ruins of Pompeii, proving the shiny metal became the material of choice in the era. The first time diamonds appeared in an engagement ring was in 1477, when Archduke Maximilian of Austria proposed to Mary of Burgundy. And that ring with the diamond in it is her ring. Every time I turn my head, I get louder. Maybe I should turn my head all the time. This started the tradition among European nobility and the aristocracy, but it didn't take off among middle classes until the Victorian era. The custom of presenting one's fiancé with a ring upon engagement really began in the 1840s. The simple bands, which sometimes included a capstone, were mutually exchanged. They served as a public sign of the couple's commitment to each other. Occasionally, another personal token, such as a portrait miniature of the to the groom-to-be in place of a ring. So in the Victorian era, grooms-to-be received rings as well as the brides. In the early Victorian era, wedding bands shaped like snakes with dotted ruby eyes were popular. See that one there? The snakes were supposed to symbolize eternity. It was also popular because Albert had presented Victoria with a snake emerald ring as a betrothal ring. And that's Victoria's ring, actually. Gemstones popularly used during this time were amethyst, ruby, smoky quartz, moss agate, bloodstone, garnet, and topaz. It was a trend during those days. The rings were usually made of the bride's birthstone. The late Victorian era saw wedding rings designed in the shape of a boat. More use of pearls and light, airy styles were seen. The late Victorian era saw solitaire diamond engagement rings make their debut, and they became highly popular in the mid-1840s. People started using platinum and diamonds and gemstones, and they started to be set in platinum, replacing gold and silver. During this time, popular motifs were stars, feathers, bows and ribbons, lace-type filigree, crowns, grape clusters, and Egyptian designs. Okay, another. What is the most popular shape of ring and the most popular metals? So when I say shape of ring, I mean the diamond. So right now, what's the most popular shape of diamond in a ring and the most popular metal used? I think gold, somebody says the most popular metal is gold. Platinum, somebody says. So these are the most popular shapes of diamonds for engagement rings now. Round, and it's called princess cut. So they are, and the most popular metals used right now are white gold and platinum. Somebody did say platinum. So I've seen a lot of the princess cut rings in the last few years. Mine is round, but mine is older. Choosing the date. There was a lot of importance on a young lady's wedding date. At an early age, girls became familiar with the rhymes and poems filled with suggestions and omens regarding the anticipated wedding day. From the following list of months, the bride could select one which she considered the most promising. So the rhyme went, "Marry when the year is new, always loving, kind, and true. When February birds do mate, you may wed nor dread your fate. If you wed when March winds blow, joy and sorrow both you'll know. Marry in April when you can, joy for maiden and for man. Marry in the month of May, you'll surely rue the day," which that's funny because lots of people get married in May. "Marry when June roses blow, over land and sea you'll go. They who in July do wed must labor always for their bread. Whoever wed in August be, many a change you're sure to see. Marry in September, shine, your living will be rich and fine. If in October you do marry, love will come, but riches tarry. If you wed in bleak November, only joy will come, remember. When December snows fall fast, marry and true love will last." As for the days of the week, they had another rhyme for that. Monday for health, Tuesday for wealth, Wednesday is the best day of all, Thursday for losses, Friday for crosses, and Saturday, no luck at all. Clearly, we don't believe in that anymore. It was said that if the day chosen by the young lady for her wedding was proven to be rainy, her life would be filled with more sorrow than joy. Well, that's not what we tell brides today, is it? And snow falling on wedding, well, being the prophecy of happiness. Now, I don't know what that means for me. I was married in February on a 65-degree day, so I don't know what it means. The white wedding dress. Go forward. The white wedding dress is really a very recent tradition in Western culture. Ancient Athenian brides wore long violet or reddish robes cinched at the waist by a girdle, and the groom was meant to loosen that girdle later, symbolizing the loss of her virginity. Marriage was made official by a feast and followed by a torchlit procession that escorted the couple to the bridal chamber. Eastern tradition is red for brides. Many still wear red now, except for traditional Japanese brides who have always worn white. And isn't that a beautiful red dress there in the middle? Earliest white wedding dresses in Western culture was an English princess, Philippa, to Scandinavian King Eric in 1406. It was a white tunic that was lined in ermine and squirrel fur. And that's Princess Philippa there in the gold with the crown. In 1558, Mary, Queen of Scots, her wedding to the soon-to-be King of France, she also wore white, although white was the color of mourning at the time for French queens, and so we can assume that Mary, Queen of Scots wasn't that happy about her wedding. White remained popular for the next few centuries, but only among nobles. Weddings in the 17th century were seen as a celebration where extravagance was expected. The bride would usually wear her best dress. Over time, certain colors were more popular. For instance, blue became very popular because it represented purity and piety, and it had a connection to Christian religions and the Virgin Mary. Go forward. Brides rarely had a dress made specifically at this time, especially if you weren't noble or royalty. Usually you would just wear your best dress for the ceremony, and there really weren't any specific colors. At the time, brides wore brown, black, or dark colors. Commoners wore the dark colors generally because they would hide stains and imperfections in the dress. These are just some examples of dresses that could have been best dresses for women during the time and that they could have worn for a wedding dress. Princess Charlotte of England wore an empire-waisted dress in metallic silver lame when she married Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld in 1816. And that is the actual dress there in a drawing of her at the wedding. Princess Charlotte was extremely popular in England, and she actually would have been Queen of England instead of Victoria. But she died in childbirth in 1817, and that kicked off a race in the English royal family to have another baby to be the heir to the throne, and that is how Victoria came to be born and came to be queen. Wedding dresses would have been worn again because they were just your best dress. They weren't specifically made for the wedding. Even royalty would probably wear the dress again. It would have been seen as crazy and absurd, even by the very rich, up until the mid-1800s, to have a dress that you wore one day. That would just be ridiculous and a waste of fabric, actually. If a non-royal woman did have a new dress made, especially for her wedding, it was likely to then become her best Sunday dress. Or it would be altered or dyed to fit someone else, things like that. She would definitely use it until it was worn out or the fashion changed beyond alteration. Most of the time, a woman got married in her best dress that she already owned, though. And just some more beautiful examples of dresses. I just love Victorian dresses. Now, the color of the bride's wedding gown also did have significance as the Victorian period went on. They would say, married in gray, you'll go far away. Married in black, you'll wish yourself back. Married in red, you'll wish yourself dead. Ooh. Married in green, ashamed to be seen. Married in blue, he will always be true. Married in white, you have chosen aright. Furthermore, gray was the color a bride should choose for her going away gown. If she wished to wear what was for ages the proper color to ensure. So that one there, the gray one, would be a going away gown. I love this dress. I would wear the heck out of that dress. Victoria's gown. These are pictures, portrait of Victoria in her wedding dress, and in the center is actually Victoria's actual wedding dress that is preserved. It was designed by the head of a government school of design, now the Royal College of Art, and it took 6 months to make. She ordered the destruction of the pattern so it could not be copied by anyone. It was a white satin dress which featured separate bodice top and a full skirt. The bodice had a round neckline with a pointed waist, decorated with piping and short full sleeves, trimmed with lace that gathered into double puffs. The skirt was gently gathered at the waist into deep into deep pleats, and featured a train that measured 18 feet in length and had a border of orange blossom sprays that matched the head wreath that she wore on her head, secured to a lace veil. Orange blossoms were a wedding tradition often worn to symbolize fertility and purity. Victoria also wore diamond necklace and diamond earrings. She wore a sapphire brooch, which was a gift from Prince Albert. And she wanted a lot of lace on her gown because she wanted to boost the British lace industry. And white was thought to present the lace the best, and so that's one of the reasons that she went with a white dress. She wanted to present English lace in the best light possible. In her diary, she wrote, "I wore a white satin dress with a deep flounce of lace and imitation of an old design. Wanted to be seen as a bride rather than queen. So I refused to wear anything that was specifically royal." So the rise of photography, in wedding portraits in particular, along with Victoria's white gown, really helped to popularize the white wedding dress. White dresses look very good in black and white photographs. They really pop, as you can see in some of these photos. In 1849, women's magazines popularized the trend and assigned purity and innocence to the color white. They said that it has always been the best and most appropriate choice. Godey's Lady Book said, "The custom has descended from the earliest ages, that white is the most befitting hue for brides, whatever may be the material. It is an emblem of purity, of innocence of girlhood, and the unsullied heart she now yields to the chosen one." So Victorians were projecting their ideals of romantic love and purity backwards, and instead of a white wedding dress symbolizing wealth, which it really did because, only wealthy people could have a white wedding dress prior to the late 1800s, now came to symbolize purity, innocence, and virginity. Okay, who is ready for another trivia? What do you think is the average cost of a wedding dress in the United States today? Anybody have a guess? Somebody says 5,000, 12,000, oh, 2,000, 3,500. The average bride spends $1,600 on her wedding dress. When I was looking for pictures, all of these dresses are about that price. But when I was looking at pictures to put up, there were some that were $300 and there were some that were $3,500 or $35,000. So yeah, you can get a wedding dress at, as I'm sure you know, at any cost, but $1,600 is apparently the average right now, which is still a lot for a dress for one day. So the average cost of a dress at Kleinfeld's, New York, which is, you've ever seen Yes to the Dress, the average dress at Kleinfeld's is $4,500. So a little bit higher than the US average cost. Wedding veils to go with them. The tradition of wedding veils dates back to Rome. The bride wore that wanted to ruin her wedding day, and the veils were deep yellow and they were over a complicated braided hairstyle. And veils kind of fell out of fashion after the medieval era, and then they became popular again when Victoria wore one. Here is Victoria in her veil, and that is her veil there displayed. The veil matched the flounces on her dress, and when she wore it, it was decorated with orange blossoms. It was 4 yards in length, and it was 3/4 of a yard wide. Victoria continued to wear her bridal veil long after her wedding day. She wore it for the christenings of 9 of her children, with the exception of her eldest son, Prince Albert. She also wore it to the marriage ceremonies of 2 of her children, her eldest daughter, Vicky, in 1858, and her youngest son, Leopold, in 1882. She also wore it to the wedding of her grandson, George, who was later King George VI. Her youngest child, daughter Princess Beatrice, was given the distinct honor of wearing Victoria's bridal veil for her own wedding in 1885. Victoria wore the veil one last time in 1897 for her official photograph on the occasion of her Diamond Jubilee. And then she left among her private instructions that she should be buried with it over her face. And that's a drawing of Victoria ready for burial. I figured it was okay to show because it's a drawing, it's not a photograph. And that is her bridal veil wrapped around her. Bridal bouquets. The bridal bouquet for the bride herself, but during ancient times in Rome and Greece, bouquets included herbs and spices to ward off evil spirits from cursing the new marriage. A few hundred years later, during the medieval era, brides carried bouquets that had more traditional flowers than we use today, like roses. Their bouquets often included herbs for good luck. Dill from the bouquets was often consumed by the groom and guests as a symbol of fertility. And these are some examples of bouquets they would have had with garlic. And actually, they're actually pretty. I wouldn't mind that. It was Queen Victoria who made the big change away from the use of herbs and spices in her bouquet by replacing them entirely with fresh flowers. She incorporated white star-shaped myrtle flowers, and after the ceremony, she planted a myrtle shrub at her holiday home, Osborne House, on the Isle of Wight. And descendants of this plant continue to grow today. Myrtle has been featured in every royal wedding bouquet in Britain ever since, with almost all brides carrying a sprig taken directly from the grounds of Osborne House. And I'm sure if you've watched any of the royal weddings, they'll comment on that there's a sprig of myrtle from Victoria's bushes in the bouquet.
Is that myrtle then on the right-hand side?
On the right-hand side. This, I believe this is the current Princess of Wales bouquet. Catherine, Princess of Wales, that's her bouquet. And this is just a bouquet. So there are lilies of the valley in Catherine's bouquet, but there is a sprig of myrtle in there as well.
Where is the point of myrtle?
The myrtle? I'm not absolutely sure.
Maybe those green leaves up.
Probably the green leaves, yeah. Because I know this is lily of the valley.
Right, and those flowers or something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I bet it's those green
it's
leaves.
got to be the green leaves, yeah. So Queen Victoria popularized another wedding tradition that we see today, the bouquet toss. During Victorian times, brides tossed their bouquet at a friend as she left so that keep that friend safe and to offer luck. The symbolism of this practice eventually transformed into what we still identify with today: the single woman who catches the bouquet will marry next. So what flower symbolizes a happy marriage?
Lily.
Somebody says lily.
Rose.
Somebody says rose. It's actually the peony.
Really?
Yes, these are all peonies. Really pretty flowers. Romantic couples may love peonies for their lush, fluffy petals, but they'll cherish them even more. The springtime bloom symbolizes a happy marriage, and it's the ideal big, bold flower in beautiful bouquets. That's according to a wedding magazine, Contemporary. So, and I agree, they do make great bouquets. Bridesmaids. In Roman times, people believed that evil spirits would attend the wedding and attempt to curse the bride and groom. So to confuse the spirits, there were bridesmaids who acted as decoys and dressed identically to the bride, and they would confuse the spirits, so the spirits would be unsure which woman was the bride, and they would leave the happy couple alone. Bridesmaids would wear whatever color the bride wore. Can you imagine today showing up the same as the bride? That wouldn't fly. In the Victorian era, it was considered in vogue to have an all-white wedding, but there were a few ground rules. The bridesmaids all had to be younger than the bride, unmarried, and their veils had to be shorter than the bride's. The bridesmaids typically wore coronets in their hair, and the veil was attached to the top of the head. It was typical for bridesmaids to wear roses or in-season flowers. The Queen Victoria, she designed all 12 of her bridesmaids' dresses herself. This is Victoria and Albert with the bridesmaids. And she opted for simple white silk designs with tulle skirts and white roses. This is the present Princess of Wales, Catherine, with her sister on her wedding day. So some English brides still do wear white, English bridesmaids, I should say. That's Pippa's sister, and she was the bridesmaid at their wedding. If you watched it, you might remember. White is not very common for U.S. bridesmaids to wear, although usually bridesmaids do dress identically to each other, just not identically to the bride. Mother brides were supposed to wear black in case they were. That makes a lot of sense. You're in mourning, you wear black every day, but for the wedding, you don't wear black. That doesn't make sense to me. So it just depended on where you lived. So Queen Victoria, that is Queen Victoria in the center there at a wedding of, I believe that was Vicky's wedding, her oldest daughter's wedding, and she is wearing purple because she is in mourning. Prince Albert had already died. The ceremony and reception. The ceremony itself was usually very similar to weddings that are held today. Usually it was held in the bride's parish church or sometimes at the bride's home in the parlor. By law in England at this time, only early morning ceremonies were permitted. Now this changed in the 1880s when ceremonies began to be permitted up to 3 p.m. Church bells would ring as the couple entered the church to signify the start of the wedding and to chase away evil forces. The service would be conducted by the clergyman as well as a parish clerk. When signing the parish register after the ceremony, the bride would sign her maiden name. After the ceremony, the couple would leave the church, being careful not to look left or right, as it was considered bad taste to acknowledge the guests. The best man would stay behind to pay the clergyman. As the couple made their way towards the wedding carriage, guests would throw rice, grain, or birdseed as a symbol of fertility. The carriage would then pull away, taking the happy couple to their breakfast reception. Victorian receptions didn't last to the wee hours of the morning like ours do. In fact, breakfast and brunch were normally held as wedding receptions because the weddings themselves were early in the morning. In England, the custom was to hold weddings at noon, and the reception was held a half hour after the ceremony. The couple would receive guests and accept congratulations in a corner of the room that had been decorated. The parents of the bride and groom would be the first to congratulate the couple. If guests were only acquainted with the groom, they would congratulate him and then be introduced to the bride. The bride was not congratulated, as it would imply that the honor in her marrying the groom. The groom is the one that has the honor of marrying the bride, so the bride is not congratulated. The groom is congratulated on having such honor. Semantics. Breakfast would be served at tables set up outdoors if weather permitted, standing, and only the bridal party would be seated. That's certainly one way to limit the length of a party. All right, which item has traditionally been considered bad luck to purchase as a gift for newlyweds? Any guesses? No guesses. The answer is knives. Years ago, it was considered bad luck for a wedding guest to purchase knives for a newly married couple. According to superstition, a knife presented as a gift will for the friendship between the gift giver and the recipient. And the only way around this is to attach a penny or a coin of symbolic value to the knife. The coin then must be removed and returned to the giver as a form of symbolic payment. This transaction prevents the relationship from cutting. The knife is seen as instantly purchased by the receiver and releases the giver from any negativities that might have otherwise resulted in its use. Yeah, just don't give it, yeah. Don't give knives. Don't register for knives if you're getting married. Wedding cakes. The tradition of the wedding cake dates back to ancient Rome. The cake was made with wheat or barley, and it was broken over the bride's head to symbolize fertility and good. Guests would then scramble to pick up the crumbs so that they too could share in the good fortune. The tradition of sharing the cake with guests continues to this day, although it's a little bit more orderly, and I haven't seen anybody break a cake over a bride's head in quite a while, so. The tradition then progressed to crumbling the cake over the bride's head, I think. Guests were served the remaining cake and crumbs, and this was supplemented with a mix of nuts, dried fruit, and honeyed almonds. In medieval England, the tradition in England was to have small spice buns stacked on top of each other to create a tower. The higher the tower, the better. Often the guests brought the buns with them, kind of a potluck situation. And as the story goes, if the bride and groom were able to kiss over the tall stack, prosperity and good. The 17th century saw the introduction of fruitcake and sugar, and a French chef introduced the English to a tiered and frosted wedding cake. Although the frosting was originally just lard, which would not be very tasty, I don't think, but over time that changed to include sugar, and that proved popular with brides at the time, and fruited cakes, not necessarily stacked, with a sweet covering gradually became the centerpiece for weddings. Over time, these traditions developed into the traditions we know today. Queen Victoria had a wedding cake that weighed 300 pounds and was 3 feet tall. It was 9 feet in circumference. It was designed by confectioner Mr. Maudet. It was decorated with figures of Victoria and Albert dressed in ancient Greek costumes. It had orange blossoms and sprigs of myrtle entwined together to cover the layers. Multiple cakes were baked so that all the guests could enjoy a piece. There was a documentary made in England not too long ago that recreated Victoria and Albert's wedding, and they actually recreated Victoria and Albert's wedding cake. So that is a baker working on just one tier of Victoria. Huge. Victorian wedding cakes were generally white, originally for practical reasons in terms of the ingredients that were available, but later because Victorians had embraced the concept that white symbolized purity. It was also common back then to make your cake as white as possible, as refined sugar was expensive, and to have a whiter than white cake covering. There were 3 wedding cakes, 1 fruit cake for guests, 1 light cake for the bride, and 1 dark cake for the groom. Guests could take boxed cake with them on their way out to eat later, but the bride's cake usually wasn't touched. Instead, it was packed away and saved to be eaten on the 25th anniversary. As soon as the cake was cut, the couple would change for their honeymoon. The cutting of the wedding cake can be attributed to ancient Roman traditions where the guests scrambled for the crumbs, and then that evolved into a more civilized way of sharing cake. In the past, it was usually the bride that cut the first slice, which was to symbolize the loss of her virginity. In the 17th century, it became popular to have a bride's cake and a groom's cake, and it was the bride's cake that was served at the wedding celebrations, thus resulting in the bride cutting the cake. Now, couples generally share this moment by slicing the first piece together. Cakes of yesteryear were heavy fruit cakes covered with rock-hard royal icing, and it was much more difficult for the bride to cut it by herself. The groom would place his hand on top of his bride's hand, as you see JFK doing there with Jackie, and they would have extra slicing power, and thus the new ritual was born. The ceremonial cut of the wedding cake symbolizes the bride and groom's first task together as newlyweds and the new life that they are starting together. And this tradition is very popular. And in fact, my son's best friend was married a couple years ago, and they didn't have a wedding cake. They had donuts, but they still went ahead and cut a donut and fed each other a piece of donut. So what is the most popular flavor used? Anybody have a guess? Well, what did somebody say?
Yellow.
Yellow. Well, yellow is a color. What flavor?
Buttercream?
Buttercream, will that be icing? What about the cake itself? Vanilla, somebody says. And you're right, vanilla. According to most bakers, it's their most requested of this cake flavor, and the possibility of incorporating different fillings and frostings with vanilla cake. Vanilla cake will go with just about anything, so that's why it's popular. New. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, and a sixpence in her shoe. That's the whole rhyme. Earliest recorded version of the first 2 lines is 1871 in a short story called Marriage Superstitions and the Miniseries of a Bride Elect. The female narrator states that she must wear something new, something borrowed, and something blue. It's possible that it was first written as far back as 1100 and passed down verbally. The first recorded version of the rhyme as we know it was in a newspaper in 1876, which reported a wedding at which the bride wore, according to ancient custom, something old, something new, something borrowed and blue. An 1898 compilation of an English folklore recounted that in this country, an old couplet directs that the bride shall wear something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. Sixpence in her shoe was added at a later date. Most of the items in the rhyme are meant to ward off the evil eye, a curse that could make the bride infertile. Brides also wore something old to show continuity with the past. By including an old, probably inherited or cherished item in the wedding outfit, the bride symbolically maintains a connection with her past as she enters married life. Often the selected old item holds a link to the bride's family, and in particular to her maternal figures. Something new was to show optimism for the future. The token of something new has tended to be a bride's dress, a garment designed and selected with the support of her family, marking the start of her new union and life. Something borrowed would bring the couple good luck. Usually you would borrow from someone who was happily married. This was done in the hope that the bride might also borrow some of that material happiness. When Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Beatrice, married Henry of Battenberg in 1885, Victoria initially disapproved of the match, wishing instead that her daughter would remain at home. But in the end, Victoria lent her daughter her own dear wedding lace for the ceremony, and lending with it, presumably, her love and support. Something blue symbolizes purity, fidelity, love, and could be a remnant from a time when blue was the color to be married in. A sixpence in her shoe. Sixpence is a British coin, and it's meant to represent prosperity for the couple as they start their new lives. The garter toss. First of all, what's a garter? A garter is an article of clothing comprising a narrow band of fabric fastened about the leg to keep up stockings. In the 18th to 20th century, they were tied just below the knee, where the leg is most slender, to keep the stocking from slipping, because of course they didn't have elastic. And as someone who occasionally dresses in Victorian clothing, they are terrible to keep up. Don't tell anybody, but I wear stockings with elastic, because they're just terrible. Garters are terrible. In the Victorian era, stockings were knitted. They didn't have the elasticity to remain up. So without the use of garters, you would have them fall down to your ankles immediately. The tradition of the garter toss originated in England and France. Guests would want to obtain a piece of the bride's dress for good luck. And so to pacify the crowd and ease the bride's mind and not have people tearing at her dress, the groom began tossing out a piece of the bride's wedding attire, and the easiest thing to toss would be the garters. And they would make a quick escape from the reception while everyone was chasing the garter. Wedding music. Here comes the bride. 1858, Queen Victoria's oldest daughter, Princess Vicky, married Crown Prince Friedrich. They established the tradition of playing Wagner's bridal chorus at weddings. Today it's known as Here Comes the Bride, and that was used as the processional. And Princess Vicky also wore a white wedding dress and a veil, which further established the white wedding gown tradition. Other popular wedding songs are the Wedding March, composed by Felix Mendelssohn in 1842 to accompany a production of Shakespeare's A Midnight Summer's Dream. It was first used for a wedding in 1847. Princess Vicky and Fritz used it for their recessional, and that made it a wedding trend for Victorians. Trivia. Why is June the most popular month for weddings? So, what did you say in the back? March babies. Or June. The weather, yeah, it could be the weather, but really it goes back to the ancient Roman goddess Juno. She ruled over marriage, the hearth, and childbirth, and that is why weddings over the centuries. Now it's probably more because of the weather, but That's why June originally became popular. The honeymoon. Honeymoons began in ancient times when a groom would carry off the bride to a secret place where she could not be found. This would usually last about 30 days, and while they remained in hiding, they drank brew made from mead, which is a honey. Once the cake is cut at a reception, the bride and groom change into traveling clothes. The bridesmaid would help the brides change, and then the bride would give them each a flower from her bouquet. When the bride and groom were ready, they were driven off in a carriage and showered with rice and satin slippers to bring good luck. If a slipper landed in the carriage, it's even better luck. The best man would go to the train station before the couple to look after their luggage. And the best man was the only person who knew their destination. Secrecy. It was considered bad manners and bad luck to ask a newly married couple their destination. Queen Victoria's wedding. It was on February 10th, 1840. This is a drawing of the wedding. She read, as we know, Prince Albert of Saxe and Coburg-Gotha. It was the first time an English queen was married while on the throne in 300 years. They were married at the Royal Chapel of St. James Palace, and Victoria's wedding created the modern wedding idea of today. Albert wore a British Field Marshal's uniform. He was escorted by a squadron of lifeguards, and he entered the chapel to see the conquering hero pass. Victoria was given away by her uncle, the Duke of Sussex. She had 12 bridesmaids, and as I said earlier, she had an 18-foot-long train embellished with orange blossoms. Royal weddings as Queen Victoria had the first big spectacle of a royal wedding. Before Victoria, weddings were thought to be very private and attended only by extremely close friends and family. Victoria, at the time she was married, was a very popular young queen, and to enhance her popularity, it was decided that it would be a great morale booster for the public for her wedding to be a wedding for the nation. Victoria herself was not thrilled at the idea of parading through the streets in a carriage in her wedding dress, which is what this is a drawing of. This is Victoria and Albert after their wedding ceremony. Victoria's daughter, Princess Vicky's wedding in 1858 was a lavish event, much like her mother's. The wedding day was bitterly cold, but it didn't deter large crowds from gathering in the streets as the procession made its way from Buckingham Palace to St. James Chapel. After the ceremony, the procession returned to Buckingham Palace, where the newlyweds appeared on the balcony before the wedding breakfast. Sounds familiar?
Now, is that the same person about that whole picture, or was that bridesmaids or what?
The bride is in the center, and those are her bridesmaids.
And they all have what?
Yeah, they all, at this time, they would all,
Oh, they look like twins.
yeah, they look like twins. So here's modern royal weddings. They have followed Victoria's example. The wedding of Charles and Diana was seen worldwide by an audience of 750 million people. And Prince William and Prince Harry's weddings were also televised to millions of viewers around the world. Anniversaries quickly. The idea of giving a gift to mark a wedding anniversary has been traced by various sources to ancient Rome or medieval Germany, but it's hard to come up with an actual instance of anniversary presents exchanged by married couples that go that far back. By the 18th century, though, the evidence of gift giving is more solid. A couple's friends might give a wife a wreath made out of silver to commemorate 25 years of marriage, and should the couple reach 50 years together, a gold wreath. These traditions start showing up in the 1800s, and that timing is fitting. The ideal originated in the late 19th century during the Victorian era. It makes total sense. This was a period when it became an exchange of gifts or from other people, because this was the period when the love match was triumphing. Though both sides of a couple would celebrate these anniversaries, according to an 1850 travel book, the wife wore a silver wreath and the husband a silver buckle for their 25th anniversary, and presents given to the wife were commonly emphasized. By 1859, the Old Farmer's Almanac counted off 1 month from marriage makes a sugar wedding, 1 year makes a paper wedding, then wood at 5, tin for 10, silver for 25, golden at 50, and diamond at 75. Other sources describe a copper wedding at 12 and a half years. But why and how were the items like paper, wood, silver, or gold associated with certain anniversaries? The reasons for many are obscure. For the first anniversary may represent the blank page of the marriage, writing your future together, and also reminds of the fragile beginnings of a marriage. Wood may stand for strength and stability, silver for the value of a long-lasting marriage, and gold for strength, wisdom, and prosperity. All right. If there are any questions that anyone has? Any comments, questions? Yes, in the back.
What's the first record of someone, a bride and groom, smashing cake in each other's face?
Oh, the first reference of bride and groom smashing cake in each other's face. You know, I don't know, but I wonder if that goes back to when they used to break the cake over the bride's head. That's kind of similar, isn't it? I have read that couples that smash the cake into each other's face have a higher likelihood of divorce.
Yeah, right away.
So I don't know what the correlation there is. I'm married 31 years and we didn't smash cake, so I don't know.
What about the divorce part? I mean, was it like nobody did it or whatever?
The question is about divorce in the Victorian era. Divorce was very unusual at this time. You could get a divorce, but it was kind of taboo. It was looked down on, difficult to do, but could be done. But most people didn't want to go through the scandal of that. It would be a very big scandal. And you'd have to have a really good reason, not just we're not fond of each other anymore. Other questions? Are there anybody typing anything online? Just thought I'd ask. No? Okay. All right, well, I want to thank you all for coming out. Thank you for supporting library programs. I think library programs are great, not just because I give them, but just in general. I think it's great that libraries provide this resource. So continue to support your library and all the programs that are coming up. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Oh, question in the back.
So what other programs do you do?
What other programs do? I do a lot of programs on the presidents and the first ladies. I do programs specifically about the Lincoln family. I do a program about Victorian mourning, and what's the other Victorian one? Victorian mourning, and I just blanked on it. Something else about the Victorian times. And then I do programs on Walt Disney World, the history of Walt Disney World, planning Walt Disney World, the history of the Walt Disney Company and of Pixar. And yeah, that's pretty much my different categories. So,
Degree in history?
I don't have a degree in history, actually. I've just been interested in history my entire life. When I was a small child, my parents got me interested in the Lincolns, and I've been learning about the Lincolns since I could read, basically. And learning about the Lincolns got me interested in history in general, and that got me interested in the presidents, especially because, of course, Lincoln's a president, so that got me interested in the presidents and the first ladies. And then the Lincolns lived in the Victorian times. And I'm a little different as far as talking about the presidents. I like to talk about them as people rather than so much of what they did as president. I mean, I do talk about that too, but I kind of focus on the more personal side of them. So that's how I got into talking about the Victorian times, because I learned about the Victorian times by studying the Lincolns. And then Walt Disney World, I'm just kind of obsessed with Walt Disney World. So we go there all the time, and I'm just, being a historian, I started studying how Disney World came to be and how they built it. So that's how I got involved in all the different topics that I talk about. Yes?
I missed the beginning. What was the time period for Victorian?
That was Victoria's reign from 1837 to 1901.
And do you primarily speak at the libraries then?
Mostly at libraries, occasionally at historical societies. I travel all over the Chicago area. I also do libraries via Zoom. I've been at libraries in New York and Florida and places like that. I'll be at Geneva Library tomorrow doing lesser known presidents. Did you have a question?
Yeah, when's your next Walt Disney World?
Come up and talk to me after. I have to look at my calendar. Sure.
Do you have a website?
I do have a website. Let me put back up the first slide. I'll put back up my contact information. Usually I have it at the end of the presentation, but I forgot to put it at the end of this presentation. Yes, yes. On my website is my calendar with all of my upcoming presentations. Whoops, one forward. There we go. With all of my, I also have cards with me if anybody wants a card which has this information on it. I hope you don't mind that I'm saying they asked. I start promoting myself. Yeah, I have on my website all of my upcoming presentations. A lot of them that are soon do have links, like if it's for a library in New York that you could register to watch it on Zoom. Like I said, tomorrow I'll be at Geneva Library at 1 o'clock doing lesser known presidents. And I know I have 3 different Zooms next week, but I can't remember where they are. But anyways, yeah, it's all on my website.
Well, I'm very excited that you are here in person tonight.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be in person too. You know, doing Zoom has been great because, you know, it kept things going during the pandemic, but it sometimes is really hard because I can't interact with the audience. And that's really fun, you know, it's fun to get your feedback. You know, when there's something funny, I don't know if you thought it was funny or not, you know. So that can be hard too. So yeah, I really like being in person. Although, you know, if I have to do Zoom, you know.
It's nice to be in a room with people of similar interests.
It is.
Instead of by yourself.
Well, it is. And, you know, my husband's here in the building. He's not in the room because, you know, he has to listen to this all the time. And so he's always thrilled when I have people who want to listen to me. Thank you all for coming again. Thank you. Thank you. And like I said, if you do happen to want my card, I do have some, but if you don't, that's cool too.
I would like one.
Okay. There's my husband.
I would like one.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
My friend.
Oh, sure. Let me grab some more.